trans people as we understand them today are all going to not exist. Either you're going to be forcibly turned into a conforming cis person, or you will be dead, and they don't care which one it is as long as you don't exist as trans. There have been anti-trans bills all over the place, all over this country for at least the past year, and there are just more and more and more of them. So we often see more and more testimony. A lot of these hearings where they're receiving public comment, they're flying in a bunch of quote unquote experts who are like dentists and other super qualified professionals, quote unquote qualified professionals. The same 5D transitioners over and over again. Apparently Matt Walsh decided to show up and testify at one of these things. The ones that we keep seeing popping up on my timeline, at least, are the ones like youth healthcare bans, like against trans kids having access to healthcare. Sports, sometimes we see some of these about sports as well. In this case, I believe, it's just yet another one in Tennessee this time regarding trans kids having access to healthcare. I haven't looked into the bill at all because I'm sure that the thing about a lot of these things is it's the same bill, like repeatedly, like the literal same content copy pasted. It's not original. Like we watched the Trump video recently, and Trump managed to hit every single talking point that just like took all of these different anti-trans bills that are happening across the country and like compiled all of the bullshit that they say into like one 4-minute campaign video. I wanted to look at this Matt Walsh testimony. First, we're going to look at this video that's been like edited together a little bit just to keeping it tight and edited here. And then Matt Walsh himself included some more context and was like, funny how you clip-chimped this whole thing. He didn't say clip-chimped, but like that's the idea. Like, funny how you clipped out all the context, such and such and such. So we'll see. We'll see if the context makes it any better, Mr. Walsh. Mr. I definitely have a chin under this beard Walsh. Mr. I wore a trilby to my wedding Walsh, milady. If you haven't hit like already, do that really quick. All right, let's go ahead and watch this first little bit. This one's all disingenuously edited, supposedly, so we'll see what this is all about.
Can you give us a summary of your educational background or your healthcare education?
I didn't go to college, but I did go to school long enough to learn how to read, so I can read the
I didn't go to college, but I did go to school long enough to learn how to read. Like, all right, man, cool.
Data for myself, and that's exactly what I've done.
And for what purpose do you conduct your research and use this brain of yours?
I use it for the purpose of trying to protect children from being castrated and mutilated.
You don't use it to get clicks?
Well, are you using it right now to try to get clicks with this interaction?
Are you using it right now to try to get clicks with this interaction? Like, answer the question, man. Like, what are you talking about? This Darvo Why do people do that? I really, really, really hate it when someone's like, when it's like, hey, are you doing this disingenuously? And they're like, well, are you being disingenuous right now? Like, wow, what a fucking idiot.
If you're going to come before a committee and make mischaracterizations and misrepresentations, it's fair game for us to ask you your educational background.
You seem to have started this, so you have no medical background, correct?
No.
You're trying to address good public policy, correct?
Yes.
I just have to question, some of your public policy. Singapore is able to have nice things in part because...
Oh, yeah. You know how everybody always says, like, Twitter is not real life? Like, guess what? Twitter is real life. It turns out the things that you say on Twitter are public statements, and you will have these things called into question if you then try to make public policy. He has the receipts.
Because they execute drug dealers by hanging and arrest even petty vandals and thieves and beat them with a cane until they bleed. We don't have nice things here because we aren't willing to do what is required to maintain them. I kind of have to question your public policy beliefs. And you also stated there'd been no studies. Well, I'm sitting here holding a study from the American Academy of Pediatrics, suicidal disparities between transgender and cisgender adults and children. Before you state things, you may need to know all the facts.
On your blog, at about 60.
Hey, again, this is a little bit, it's edited in such a way to be like, we're highlighting the dunks that the committee members are doing on Matt Walsh. So again, we'll see if Mr. Matt Walsh's context makes it any better.
You're an adult who's mature and can make decisions. You're that at 16. I don't care what anybody says, even going so far as to say when you're 16, you should be married and pregnant. 16 is...
So these are like, he's calling out statements that Matt Walsh has made previously, where he's basically said that 16 years old is like the perfect age for a young girl to get pregnant and like get married and stuff.
an adult in your view? Why does this bill have minor defined as 18?
I was a radio host 13, 14 years ago in my early 20s. It's also not an accurate reflection of what I actually said. I was talking about the fact that people tended to marry young historically, and that's all that was about. How does that relate to this?
To all of a sudden act like this phenomenon.
Well, yeah, I mean, it relates to this because if you think that people who are 16 have enough agency to get married and have babies, then you also should think that they have agency to make other medical decisions, like transition-related medical decisions or something like that. I don't know.
Of girls getting pregnant at a young age that we consider young, 16 or 17, to act like it's a new thing is ridiculous. It's always been that way. Girls between the ages of like 17 and 24 is when they're technically most fertile. Recently, in the last 30 years or so, we decided that's way too young to start a family. So what I'm saying is that the problem is not per se teenage pregnancy, it's unwed pregnancy. That's the problem in society.
Yeah, so he was for sure saying, like, at the age of 16, you should be able to get married off, and then it's okay for you to have sex with an adult and get pregnant. It's more like age 26 to 18 anyway. Right, like age 16, your body isn't even finished developing. Like, part of the reason why women used to die so often in childbirth and die so young was because they were birthing children at like age 15, which is too young to have a baby. You're putting your body through too much. You're not done growing. Your hips are not done filling out. And then here, oh yeah, right in the replies, right here, Matt Walsh, whoops, you guys accidentally edited all of these clips and spliced them together to remove most of my responses. I'm sure it was a simple oversight. Here are the full interactions. You're welcome. Today I testified at a committee hearing in support of a bill banning child mutilation in Tennessee. I cannot talk today. A Democrat on the committee asked what qualifies me to speak on the subject. It was a very dumb question, but I tried my best to answer it for him. I mean, that's not a dumb question. Like, what? Yeah, preeclampsia. It's not a dumb question. Why do you, like, it? This is a question of medical care and, like, whether this type of treatment is good practice for medical care for trans kids. And you should be qualified. All right, Mr. Walsh, let's see if your context is any better, sir.
Can you give us a summary of your educational background or your healthcare education experience?
Mr. Walsh, you're recognized.
My experience in healthcare?
Your educational background. I'm just curious. You testified as to a lot of your own research. So I'm curious for what purpose you do that and what background you have to qualifies you to speak to that.
Well, my background
Walsh.
that qualifies me to speak to this is that I'm a human being with a brain and common sense, and I have a soul. And so therefore, I think it's a really bad idea to chemically...
That's like his whole justification is like, I have a brain and I've decided that this type of medical care is immoral.
castrate children. That is my experience. Also, I did, now it's true, I didn't go to college, but I did go to school long enough to learn how to read.
I didn't go to college, but I did go to school long enough to learn how to read. You did not go to school long enough to learn how to critically think, sir. I'm sorry for you on that regard. Where did you grow up? Like, what kind of, like, did this man even go to high school, or was he, like, for sure, like, homeschooled?
So I can read the data for myself, and that's
I have a soul. Citation needed. Oh, no.
exactly what I've done.
Representative Clemens, you're
And
recognized.
for what purpose do you conduct your research and use this brain of yours?
Mr. Walsh, you're recognized.
I use it for the purpose of trying to protect children from being castrated and mutilated. That's one of the things I try to do.
You don't use it to...
Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You don't use it to get clicks on your
Let's state that.
publication?
Well, are you using it right now to try to get clicks with this interaction?
Oh, my God, dude. Like, it's still so disrespectful. Hold on.
No, I really like the
Mr.
idea
Walsh.
of getting of drawing attention to the fact that this is happening to children. I know you seem to find it very amusing. I don't.
Wow. That's the kind of thing that you do when you know for sure that you've been called out. Like, that's just classic textbook deflection of someone who has been accurately, like, laser sight targeted called out. Like, you're doing this to generate clicks. And he's like, well, I know, no, you're doing that. Actually, I'm not. That's you. How dare you even accuse me? It seems like you accusing me is you admitting that you're guilty of doing that, actually. I think that you're trying to get the clicks. He says, I loved this part where one of the Dems fell completely silent when I asked him whether he thinks 16-year-olds can consent. Let's see. Hold on. This was tweeted by Ben Shapiro.
I found it. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I found it interesting. One of our people testified today that they had their gender affirming surgery at 16. And I know you in former comments mentioned this on your blog. At about 16, you're an adult who is mature and can make decisions. You're that at 16. I don't care what anybody says. Even going so far as to say, 16 people. When you're 16, you should be married and could be pregnant or should be pregnant. So I'm curious if 16 is an adult in your view. Why does this bill have the minor defined as 18?
Mr. Walsh, you're recognized.
Yeah, that's a hit piece you took from
Matt Walsh is like apparently not able to understand the decorum of the room. Like almost every time he's started answering these questions before being recognized. And like, yeah, it's super arbitrary and honestly a little bit creepy when you have these like almost ritualistic aspects to these meetings where like, this person has been officially recognized and like you have to be called upon and like you have to wait until the correct moment to take a bathroom break and shit like that. Like it can be a little bit weird. Matt Walsh just fundamentally does not understand the rules of this procedure. It's only like a small faux pas, I'm sure, to like interrupt and like start talking before he's been called upon, but it is grating on my nerves.
Media Matters from something when I was a radio host 13, 14 years ago, in my early 20s. It's also not an accurate reflection of what I actually said. I was talking about the fact that people tended to marry young historically, and that's all that was about. How does that relate to this subject?
Just curious of your definition of if you feel like people are adults at 16 should.
Well, people are adults at 18, but actually, your brain is not fully developed until you're 25.
Okay, are you going to decide to make the age for marriage and the military and drinking and everything age 25?
So we should be having a conversation about whether we should even be doing these surgeries to people at 18. But certainly before 18, it's absurd. I mean, do you think that a 16-year-old can meaningfully consent to having their body parts removed?
12 seconds later. This is like a really weirdly long silence, but also like I don't think it is typically considered normal for questions to be asked back. Is that normal? Like, unless it's a clarifying question. Yeah, it would be like a witness asking the judge questions in a court of law. Or like, I mean, it would be more like a witness asking the lawyer. Yeah, like the lawyer is there asking you questions and you start questioning the lawyer. The lawyer and the judge are both going to be like, what the hell are you doing? Like, that's not procedure here. So yeah, there's one more of these. Things were kicked off with this perfectly valid and relevant question from a Republican about claims that, quote, gender affirmation reduces the suicide rate. As I explained, that claim is utterly baseless. Oh, okay, so we're just going to have 3 minutes of Matt Walsh declaring what is scientifically sound.
Just a quick question for you. We've heard in the news last week and even today that it's pro-life to vote against this bill. We've heard that suicides are prevalent, and suicide has impacted my family, so I'm sensitive when I hear something like that. I've read some of the stuff that you've done, and I was wondering, can you speak to the statistics of mental health and suicidal tendencies for the people who have gone through transition and for people who have not? In your studies, from what I've read, can you speak to that?
Mr. Walsh, you're recognized.
Sure.
Every time that he does not respect the decorum of this space, it's, I guess, weird for an anarchist to be sitting here like saying you should respect the decorum of this, like essentially this legal proceeding. But God, the autistic in me is just like, please, acknowledge the structure. Jesus.
Well, the claim that doing the chemical castration drugs or surgery or hormonal intervention, the claim that this prevents suicide or has positive psychological effects down the line is utterly, totally baseless.
Okay, so yeah, he's just going to throw out all of the scientific research that disagrees with him on this, I suppose.
There are no credible long-term studies that bear that out. And one of the reasons for that is that there couldn't possibly be any credible long-term studies because we've never done this to kids on this scale.
Oh, this is also like We've never done this to kids on this scale. We have plenty of trans people who grew up in the 70s and 80s, like who got treatment, who transitioned. It's fine. There are trans kids, like there are people who used to be trans kids who are now trans adults. It's fine. Like it just overt lies. Just overt lies.
Ever before in history. So this current, shall we say, crop of children, they are the guinea pigs. This is all experimental. We're sort of trying it out on them to see if it works.
No.
Now, they have attempted a few times to do studies, and the interesting thing is that the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, WPATH, which is a radical far-left pro-trans
organization.
They commissioned a study to try to prove that that hormones and puberty blockers decrease suicide rates among trans-identified youth, and even in their own study, they found that they couldn't prove it. They couldn't make that link because it's just not possible to do. The other thing I would mention too is that
it's just not possible. Wait, what do you mean? It's not possible to do? It's not possible to demonstrate a difference in mental health outcomes, but like before and after implementation of puberty blockers or before and after implementation of hormones. Like, oh my God, dude. Yeah, tide goes in, tide goes out. Can't explain that. You absolutely can't explain that for sure.
You know, the number of trans-identified youth has skyrocketed in recent years. We're talking about exponential 10x, 20x growth.
Do I need to pull out the graph of left-handedness? Like, yeah, it turns out when you stop beating children for using their left hand, you have a temporary dramatic increase in left-handedness, and then it levels out after a while. You know, it turns out if you try to suppress trans kids, and then suddenly there's a bunch more awareness, and we make this slight change toward acceptance rather than suppression, then yeah, you're gonna see temporarily a dramatic increase, and then it's gonna level out. But no, this man has the IQ of a fucking goldfish.
Huge numbers have increased. And what we hear from the pro-trans side is that, well, this is not a social contagion. It's just that, you know, there's always been this many trans people. It's just that they were not in an affirming environment before in history, and so they couldn't come out. And now for the
yeah, that's why people don't come out until they're adults later on.
First time trans people have the ability to live their truth, so to speak. Well, if that's the case, and there have always been these sort of millions of trans people, and if it's also true that if we don't affirm them, that it would cause them to commit suicide, then we should be able to look back in history and find just this unbroken, incredible epidemic of children mysteriously killing themselves because they weren't being affirmed as trans. And what you find is that didn't exist. I mean,
I actually don't know how you would look at that because they're the thing is that a lot of these kids are going to have killed themselves and their parents are just going to chalk it up to depression and oh, they were being bullied. So yeah, they killed themselves because they were being bullied. That's the thing about being a trans person in the closet is that when you die, no one knows that you died because you were trans. Yeah, and that doesn't even, suicides have also historically been covered up. Oh, they had an accident because it's also, first of all, it used to be considered sinful. It was sinful to commit suicide, so you want to hide that from the community. It's shameful to commit suicide, so you hide that from the community. You know, it's not proper. You know, that's a private matter. We don't discuss this. So how could you even tell historically? How do you, if not everybody leaves a suicide note, how do you know why people in ancient Greece may or may not have committed suicide? It's just such a weird guy. Yeah, reminder when Matt said, quote, prepubescent kids are getting double mastectomies on Joe Rogan. Yeah, exactly.
The youth suicide rate has increased exponentially alongside trans affirmation. So trans affirmation causes the suicide.
Is that actually the case? Has teen suicide been on an increase? I would be interested to see if that's the case. And also, just because there is a correlation between two increases doesn't mean that there is a causal relationship between them necessarily in this case. You have to demonstrate the causal relationship.
Suicide rate, not the other way around. The last thing I'll note is that the suicide rate among trans-identified people is sky high. It remains sky high. All the data shows this. It remains sky high even after surgery. And in fact,
Okay, again, so that is just a lie. He doesn't believe anything he says. He knows is all to justify his theocratic fascism. How people think the guy who wants to execute his enemies isn't above lying is beyond me. Yeah, I mean, he just is literally lying. And I do kind of wish that there were more active pushback on this I think that he's going to finish talking and then they're going to dismiss him. I think he just overtly is willing to do and say whatever is required to eliminate trans people. But that's just a funny little feeling that I have.
Most reliable data that we have, it's years after surgery when suicidality is the highest for trans-identified people.
What are you talking
That's the
about?
reality.
Oh my God, what the are you talking about, man? Oh my God. I don't even have very much to add. Do I have to have like a fucking dissertation of links ready? And it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter when you're talking to someone like Matt Walsh or like any of the kind of people who believe Matt Walsh, because again, they're just fascists who will do and say whatever they need to in order to accomplish their goals. So if you bring good studies to the table, they'll just say like, oh, that study was done by the WPATH. They're biased, so you can't listen to anything they say. Only this study from America First Nuclear Families Only. This is the only unbiased study on the subject. Like, oh my God, I hate this fascist fucking idiot. Being in virtual distance of Matt Walsh has been proven to reduce your IQ. Don't bother. I usually don't talk about him because I'm seeing red. All I'm seeing is intrusive thoughts. Matt Walsh is the enemy that we're against. Like, it's important to acknowledge that this psychopath is doing his best to make sure that trans people as we understand them today are all going to not exist. Either you're going to be forcibly turned into a conforming cis person, or you will be dead and they don't care which one it is as long as you don't exist as trans. They will do whatever it takes to make that happen. And I would say it's fair to say that we should do whatever it takes to make sure they cannot stop us in any way, shape, or form. Thank you so much for watching. It's March, which means it's my birthday month, which means it's a great time to join up on Patreon if you'd like to do that. I want to shout out some of my patrons today. We have Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvak, Jovian F. Gaudreau, Amanda B., Danielle McDonald, Sarah A., Athiette, Michelle Winter, R. Halverson, Wellington Marcus, Elizabeth Bartell, Suzanne Maynard, Nova, Sojo, Mr. Atheist, and Kevin Young.